Alright, okay, I think we can get started then. Okay. Alright, thanks for coming in, guys. It's really nice to support a small streamer, um, and attend today. We're just going to be running over some of the measures in the federal budget for first home buyers in particular. So the two big things we'll be running over is kind of the CGT changes that they ran through, and also the negative gearing changes, which are more targeted at property investors, but they're going to change the housing market as a whole quite a significant amount. We're gonna hop on Paint to draw some nice diagrams out and hopefully make it nice and straightforward for everyone. So, the first thing I want to cover is CGT, which is arguably the biggest change in the federal budget this year. I've got this speech up just because I want to run through some of the things that Labor has been saying about this speech. They're calling it one of the most ambitious budgets we've had in a good 20 years. And they have a particular section dedicated to taking the pressure off the public and allowing assistance with first home buyers. Yeah, more homes at a fair go for first home buyers. So it is something they really wanted us to focus on for the federal budget. Now, did they completely achieve this? Sorry, I just have to hop on that to check the chat. Is it something they completely achieved? That's debatable. But nonetheless, um, it's important to be informed in your position, especially. So CGT, without further ado. So what is CGT? CGT. Let's not bust out the paint yet. CGT stands for capital gains tax. And that is the tax, you guessed it, that you're spending on a capital gain. So what's a capital gain? A capital asset is going to be a significant asset that you own, such as a house, a vehicle. For the purposes of this, of course, we're talking about houses. And the capital gain that you get on a house, you're going to be taxed on. So let's say we've got a house. Let's try to draw a nice established house. This is our house. Let's say we spend 500,000 on this house in 2013. Let's say about 10 years later, 2023, the house is now worth 1.2 mil. So it's gone up a lot. That's unrealistic increase, but let's say it's worth 1.2 mil now. Your capital gain would be the amount that you are going to claim, say you sold this house in 2023. So you're going to be at a capital gain of 700,000, which should be fairly straightforward. Just 1.2, take away the amount that you spent on it, you're making a capital gain of $700,000. Now, how does this get taxed? Okay, CGT. Pretty straightforward until this year. They just added a 50% discount on it, so that in this instance, you would be taxed on 350,000. And then you would just be taxed at the rates of your particular individual rate. So that discount was intended to only be available for people that are holding the asset for at least 12 months. And it assisted in the position of a lot of long-term property investors to be able to flip these properties and not pay that much on tax. So what have they done to it? Completely revamped CGT. So let's make this bigger. So instead of just a 50% discount, and you're just paying tax on the 50% of the capital gain, they now adjust it for inflation based on something called the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index. This is going to start as of 1st of July 2027. So with the Consumer Price Index, it's basically a mechanism that calculates inflation. So let's say that the CPI finds it's that same factual matrix of 500,000 to 1.2 million. Let's say the CPI says that it's going to be a roughly 28% of this property increase can be accounted to inflation. That would mean, rather than being taxed the 50% that you would usually, you're now being taxed on 72%. Now, 28% is already quite a high inflationary figure, so you can see how property investors in general are spending a lot more money. 72% greater than 50%. So it's basically just a mechanism to attain more tax money for the government, primarily targeting these property investors. And that is the rationale that they've discussed, how they're planning on bringing billions in with this budget in taxpayer dollars. So with that being said, as I said, this is only going to be instated on June 1st or July 1st, 2027. So it just past under a year that it will be instated. And they're doing it in a manner so the people who currently have these properties have access to that 50% discount up until the 1st of July 2027, and then it's going to transfer over to the inflation-based indexation system that I was talking about. This system. And what this means is that people won't feel this urge now to be going, okay, I'm going to be paying more on the capital gain. I need to sell now. And all of a sudden, it causes this massive market shake-up. So they've contained it in that regard. And it's also important to note that new builds, so home and land packages, let's get some land here. It's our land. Home and land packages are not going to, I don't know what I was doing there, it's not needed. They're not going to be under this ruling. So they can choose whether they want this inflation-based indexation system or whether they just want a 50% discount on it. And that's to encourage construction and build up the housing numbers in Perth, so that housing prices can decrease. Part of the rationale behind how this is going to help first home buyers. So that was the first main thing we're going to discuss. We're going to talk about negative gearing as well, but is there any questions on CGT, or am I good to kick forward on that? Okay. So the consumer price index, I've got the consumer price index up. Basically, this massive index from the ABS that discusses inflation and household expenditure. So this chart is going to determine, roughly at least, how much a particular asset is being inflated. So there'll be a figure for housing. I've just pulled that 28% figure out of the air, but the 72% figure was as simple as, let's say we check that consumer price index, houses have gone up 20% from 2013 to from 2013 to 2016, let's say. And then I'm looking to sell my property. It's going to be taxed exclusive of the inflationary value. So you're going to be taxed on 80%, which, again, comparing that to the 50% CGT discount is onerous. It's a lot higher of a figure that you're going to be taxed on. Okay, cool. So negative gearing. We will all loop this back into first home buyers, but it's important to understand these two metrics. So we're going to build a second house this time, and this is going to be a nice house. It's going to be exactly the same as the other one, but it's going to be bigger to show that it's a better house. The other thing this budget did was it grandfathered negative gearing. So what's negative gearing? Let's say that we purchase this property, we get it on a loan. So we take out a $500,000 loan. We put a deposit of 5% down, so that's going to be $10,000. All right. Nope. $25,000. And then now we owe 475,000. Now, let's say we rent out this property, and we are renting this out for more than we are making back on these mortgage repayments. So let's say we're doing it at $2,000 a month, just as a out of the air figure. $4,000 a month, let's say, because that's a little low. We're at $4,000 a month. And we are renting this property out for less. So we are at a negative cash flow because the amount we're renting out this property for isn't making up for these mortgage repayments. So overall, we're at a loss. Negative gearing then comes in and says that's okay. Even though you're at a loss of, let's say, $500, we're renting it out for $3,500 a month, and we're spending $4K, so we're at a $500 cash loss. Then negative gearing says we can take that off our taxable income, so we're getting taxed on less. And obviously that's important because let's say we earn $80,000, get a cash flow of 500. That was a month, wasn't it? So times 12 would be $6,000. Your taxable income would then become $74,000 because negative gearing will let you take that amount off of this. So now you're only getting taxed on $74,000, and under the tax brackets, that could very well put you at a lower tax bracket. It doesn't in this example, but let's say you're earning $140,000, you lose 5,000 of that, and then all of a sudden you are in that lower tax bracket and you're paying significantly less tax. I did see a question there about CGT, which I'll quickly answer. If the government is increasing CGT for more of a profit, will they increase first home buyers grant? No, is the answer to that. I really don't have much more to say than that. No, but they are putting money towards something at least, which we'll touch on just after negative gearing. So I said before the negative gearing had been grandfathered, so this process didn't exist. It doesn't exist now, but it still does exist if you currently retain a property. So if you had this house, I'm not drawing the whole thing, but if you had this house before July 1st, 2027, you can still negative gear it. Just means properties after July 1st, 2027, you're not able to negative gear. And much like the CGT rules, new builds are exempt. So if you have a home and land package, you can negative gear it to your heart's consent. Let's just summarize CGT. And if you have any questions about negative gearing, please put that in now. CGT, grandfathered, moved from 50% discount to inflation adjusted system. Overall, likely more tax liability for property investors. And much the same, negative gearing, cash flow loss. Loss can be offset against your taxable income, paying less tax. It's as simple as that, negative gearing. And for both of these, I'll put this in red, new builds exempt begin on 1st of July 2027. People, and after July 1st, 2027, can you negative gear it? If it's a new build, otherwise, no. It's being completely grandfathered, and I don't know if I've explained that word, but it quite literally does just mean after 1st of July, you're not negative gearing your property. If you have owned it before that point, then it's still an option. So, boring stuff out of the way, how does this actually apply to first home buyers? So one good thing that they are doing that's objectively good is the local infrastructure fund. So with all this tax money, as well as funding, as you'll see, there's, first funding round is opening later this year. They are just putting a flat $2 billion towards infrastructure that enables new housing. So it has a list here, your roads, your footpaths, bridges, stormwater drains, water and wastewater infrastructure. So that's part of how they're rationalizing all of this, is they're saying we're taking more tax money overall from property investors, but we are giving back a significant amount of $2 billion. So that's great for us. So what is the takeaway from all of this? I don't know whether I want to use word or paint for this. I think I'm going to use word. So let's just go application to first home buyers. So, what does it mean? Negative gearing and the CGT being grandfathered, it was meant as a measure to stop market shake-up. Because if the CGT and negative gearing just get completely wiped out on the 1st of July 2027, everyone is going to be rushing to sell their properties, and it would be disastrous to the economy, obviously. So they tried to prevent shake-up by grandfathering it, but what that means is now there is very limited incentive to sell to these people. Because if you're a property investor that's negative gearing their property, you're not going to want to sell it at all because you know you'll never be able to pick up a property that that you can negative gear again. It's going to be more beneficial for you to retain that property, and that means that this lower incentive to sell will kind of stagnate the number of houses becoming available, and encourages kind of the same supply we've always had, and new builds will become that primary measure for us to increase our housing volume, which isn't necessarily an awful thing. But they definitely could have rationalized it in a bit of a better way to have a good short-term impact. Because you also see, although there's a limited incentive to sell, there is going to be a small level of short-term stress that causes panic selling. I know I just contradicted that. It's going to be at a very small scale because they have grandfathered anything, but there are going to be a lot of people that haven't read this fully and that panic sell their properties. So, new builds is the other thing that we need to touch on. So, this whole system is effectively going to make it so investors are going to be most interested in the new build market because they're going to be able to continue to have the 50% CGT discount, and they're going to continue to be able to negative gear their property. And this means that investor activity, we'll say, will increase with the new build market. That's going to drive the new build prices up because obviously these property investors can afford to put in a lot more of their capital than our first home buyers. So we're going to see a short-term increase in new build pricing. So I would suggest to first home buyers to not look into home and land packages within the next few years, at least. And much the same with rental properties. Because there's going to be reduced investor activity in established properties, and they're going to be moving to new builds. This is going to mean that there's going to be less investor properties over established homes that are being rented out. So we may actually see, especially in investor-heavy suburbs, rent prices are going to increase. So we can draw this chart very simply just to say that established properties are overall they're gonna win a bit short term. We're gonna see an increase in housing prices. Because of this limited incentive to sell, it may be slow and it may depend on both the local infrastructure fund of $2 billion that I talked about, and the gradual selling of these properties from property investors. But we're going to see a small decrease in housing prices, and over time, established properties are going to starkly decrease in price. New builds are a bit of a loser in this budget because, at least from our perspective, this is all from our perspective, because so many people are going to flow into that new build market for the incentive of negative gearing and CGT. It's not going to be as accessible as I mean, it was never overly accessible for your standard first home buyer, but it will be even less so now until the local infrastructure fund and the incentive that new builds have caused for these catch up to that, and eventually we start to see enough new builds that the price stagnates a bit. And also, rental properties are going to be at a loss. It's not optimal to rent at this stage, as we see reduced investor activity over time. Rent's going to increase in established properties until, as I mentioned, those new builds have garnered enough volume to offset this rental property, um, the lack of established properties with investor activity. What else do I need to touch on? Oh, yeah, so just some tips at the end. Legal advice, we'll say. I can't give legal advice because I'm a law student, but we're going to call it allegedly. Legal advice, I would say avoid areas with high investor activity. It's going to fluctuate housing prices for the next couple of years at least, and just overall not ideal, because you could fall into negative equity, which is where you owe more on your property than it actually is worth, which isn't ideal. I would also recommend ideally wait 2 to 4 years. Obviously it's not ideal for everyone, but we're going to see a slight decrease in housing prices, and for a lot of people, where it is an option, owner occupiers might want to wait that 2 to 4 year sprint before purchasing a property so they can take advantage of that affordability. Next, be aware that I've already touched on this, but just be aware that new builds and rental properties might increase short term in price. And also just make sure if you are going to get a property within the next 2 to 4 years, especially in that transitionary period, you are doing your research and reviewing the pricings. Review pricing in the area. It's a very important one because there are going to be a lot of home sellers, vendors, let's say, that aren't keeping up with the fluctuating prices in each area. And along that same vein, review the housing contract. Write that down. Review the housing contract, because if there's something called sunset clauses, which are the estimated time of settlement or the estimated time that the property will be built. Um, Make sure those are completely enforceable with a set date in them, and it's not a vague kind of a ballpark figure or anything like that. Because there is no doubt that with this fluctuation in pricing and with the just general stress and emotional strain around the budget, there's going to be a lot of fluctuating in kind of like attitudes, I guess you could say. So, at the same vein, make sure you've got a good dispute resolution clause, and make sure everything's set in stone so you do have the correct deal in exact figures in front of you, and it can't be changed, even if, say, there is a stark dip in housing prices in that area. Um, for a stock increase, I should say, you can still hold yourself to that price and it's not the subject of any sort of legal dispute. Oh my gosh. Okay. So you would recommend holding out on buying a first home property until the market has stabilized? Yeah, yeah, 100%. I would say it's not an option for most people, but if you can, um, there's no telling what this budget's going to do exactly, because while I have brought up and there's a lot of journal articles to indicate that there is limited incentive to sell, we've also have seen figures suggesting that there will be some level of panic selling that will be putting people that buy a property right now into negative equity. And with it really goes into everything here. Just investors flooding that new build market. It's gonna be a little more uncertain for the next 2 to 4 years. So yeah, I would recommend that. If you're forced between picking a new build or renting, which would be preferable if they're both a loss? Um, I mean, they serve very different objectives, right? Like, if you're asking which I think would get more affected by this budget, and which is maybe at a less stable position, I would probably say new builds. Just because the spotlight's really on them. There's a tax explainer here, and I would recommend if you are interested giving this a read, which highlights this new build exemption in quite some detail. And it really is the highlight. I mean, they're calling all the rest other exemptions because this new build exemption they're really trying to highlight to promote construction, and it's just putting that particular market at a bit of an uncertain state. And the extra revenue generated by the new legislation should increase new home constructions. Yeah, yeah. No, that's something that the budget is going to do correctly, and why there's only a bit of an uncertain transitionary period because um long term we will get more properties out of the infrastructure fund and out of the fact that investors are being encouraged to spend their money to build new homes. That's why they incentivize it, and it makes perfect sense from that perspective. It might be a little bit dangerous for first home buyers that want to get into that market. But from a logical perspective, it's going to help a lot of people long term decrease those home prices because we're getting these property investors involved in new builds, raising the amount of housing that we have long term, and we've got this infrastructure fund that is able to support this because it's not going straight into housing, but it's going into infrastructure surrounding housing. So those things together, I think overall we're going to see a lot more established properties going forward. And it will hopefully be a good time to buy property after this transitionary period, at least a better time than we would have had said a year ago. Um, the only concern I would say is this all begins on the 1st of July 2027. We have the election the year after. Theoretically, if we get a party into power that isn't Labour, um, they could alter or revert some of these things. But as it is now, there will. I think the short term takeaway from this is that there's going to be a short term shake-up in the market. But hopefully, long term, all of these can be considered a win, and we can kind of go forward in a better situation as first home buyers in Australia. Okay, I think that's all. Yep. Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate you guys listening. And reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.